Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something super important.
Always. Hit me with it.
Today, we're tackling the world of autism resources.
Okay.
Specifically,
Yeah.
that tough intersection of autism and poverty,
Right.
our starting point. A blog called Cheap ABA Autism Resources Needed.
Hmm.
I know, that title hits hard,
Yeah.
but it really reflects the struggles so many families face every single day.
Absolutely.
And just skimming through the articles honestly, you get a sense of the real heartbreak woven into their stories.
It's true.
But,
Yeah.
we're not just here to uncover the problems.
Right.
We're here to unearth the solutions, too.
I love that. And what's so striking about that title, Cheap ABA, is how it immediately brings a core issue to light. Affordability.
Exactly.
Applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, is often seen as like a game changer, for people on the spectrum, especially kids.
Yeah.
But for countless families, it's locked behind this massive financial barrier.
It's like having the key to a door, but not being able to even reach the doorknob.
The perfect analogy.
And it's not even just the upfront costs, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
It's finding qualified providers, which can be a nightmare in some areas.
Yeah.
Then you have the battles with insurance companies who just don't get it.
Right.
It's exhausting, to say the very least.
It's a system that often feels rigged, especially when you're autistic and facing poverty.
Yeah.
And this blog doesn't shy away from that. It digs into the struggles across the board. Education, employment, even basic things like finding decent housing.
So it really paints this stark picture of what it's like.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into those ABA costs.
Okay.
Because, there are layers to this, right? It's not just some arbitrary number.
No, not at all. You're right.
So, what are we really looking at here?
Well, first and foremost, ABA is incredibly personalized. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. Therapists undergo rigorous training to tailor programs to each individual's needs. And that level of expertise, well, it comes at a price.
So it's like custom tailoring, but for someone's brain, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
But of course.
But it doesn't help those families who are already struggling.
And that's where I think this blog is really valuable.
Yeah.
It digs into these potential solutions. And one idea that's gaining some traction is alternative funding models.
Okay.
So think like grants and scholarships, even crowdfunding platforms specifically for ABA therapy.
Okay, so sort of bypassing the traditional routes.
In a way, yeah. And another interesting approach is empowering parents through training programs.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine if parents could learn certain ABA techniques
Okay.
and then use them at home, obviously with guidance from a professional.
Right.
It's not about replacing traditional therapy completely, but it could help bridge the gap.
So instead of feeling helpless, families become active participants.
Yes. And it really highlights something crucial. We can't just throw money at this problem and expect it to go away.
Yeah.
We need solutions that address the root causes.
Okay, so now let's talk about the ripple effect, because this lack of resources doesn't just impact one area.
No.
It bleeds into everything.
Everything.
What stood out to you about the consequences in the broader sense?
Honestly, the blog's comparison to a poverty trap was pretty chilling. It's this cycle where lack of resources leads to more financial strain, which then pushes families further into poverty, making it even harder to access those resources.
It's like this horrible downward spiral.
Exactly. And then there's the emotional toll.
Yeah, and I thought it was super interesting how the blog talked about the autism tax.
I know. I'd never heard that term before either.
Me either.
Had you?
No.
It's such a powerful way to describe the hidden costs, both financial and emotional, that autistic individuals and their families face.
Yeah, it's like this invisible burden they carry every single day.
Simply because society isn't set up to support their needs.
So it's not just about the money, right?
No,
It's the emotional energy, the constant fight for understanding,
Yeah.
the feeling of being different, of being othered.
Yes.
It's a lot.
It is.
And when those needs aren't met,
Yeah.
that stress can manifest in so many ways.
Oh, absolutely. The blog highlights the alarming rates of anxiety and depression among autistic people and their families.
It's understandable, really.
Think about it. You're constantly navigating a world that feels alien.
Right.
Fighting for basic understanding and support. It's exhausting, isolating, and ultimately it can lead to, well, a diminished quality of life.
It's like you're on this different track,
Yeah.
trying to catch up to a world that's moving at a completely different speed.
That's a great way to put it. And often that feeling of isolation is compounded by the social challenges many autistic people face.
Right, right.
Communicating, socializing,
Mhm.
even just making eye contact, these things can be incredibly difficult.
So this double whammy. You're facing this pressure to conform, but you're also struggling with the very real challenges of social interaction.
And it creates this feeling, this
Yeah.
sense of being fundamentally different, of not belonging.
Right.
And that can be incredibly damaging, not just for the individual, but for their families too.
Yeah. And that's a piece we can't forget about, right? The
Definitely.
impact this all has on families.
Oh, the blog has some truly heartbreaking stories from parents and caregivers
Yeah.
who are, stretched to their limit emotionally and financially. They're forced to become these tireless advocates,
Right.
educators,
Well,
therapists.
all while juggling everything else life throws at them.
It's unsustainable, really.
So we're talking about this complex web of interconnected issues,
Right.
all amplified by financial strain.
It's a system that's failing a significant portion of the population,
Yeah.
and that's the harsh reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where this blog, Cheap ABA, goes beyond just raising awareness.
Yeah.
It's about taking action. And it lays out some really concrete steps for change.
I was actually surprised by how solution-focused the blog was.
Right. It could have just been doom and gloom.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, yeah, things are tough,
Yeah.
but here's what we can do about it.
Exactly. And one of the key takeaways for me was that emphasis on early intervention.
Oh, yeah.
The earlier we identify and support autistic kids, the better their chances of thriving.
I mean, that makes total sense.
Right. But there's this huge gap between the need and the actual resources.
Okay, so what kind of barriers are we talking about?
Well, think about those long wait lists for diagnosis.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It's brutal, especially for families who are already struggling.
Yeah.
And even when they get a diagnosis, finding affordable, high-quality interventions can be nearly impossible.
So it's like we're setting up a system that keeps those inequalities in place.
Exactly. And the blog calls for, increased funding for those early intervention programs. Advocate for policies that make these services accessible to everyone, regardless of their income.
So it's about, like, systemic change,
Yeah.
not just individual families trying to navigate a broken system.
100%.
Hmm.
We need to move beyond just individual responsibility and look at collective action.
Hmm.
And remember, the need for support doesn't just vanish when a kid becomes an adult.
So it's a lifelong thing, basically.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And the blog really hits on that. Supporting autistic folks as they transition into adulthood, navigate higher education or vocational training, find meaningful work.
Right.
That's how we create a truly inclusive society. It requires a complete shift in how we think about autism.
I feel like we're so focused on the disability label
Right.
that we miss those amazing strengths that come with being neurodivergent.
That's such a good point. The blog talks about the incredible talents and perspectives that autistic individuals bring to the table,
Oh, yeah.
especially in fields like technology, the arts, science.
It's like we're almost wasting all this potential because we're not creating spaces where those talents can thrive.
Exactly. And the blog offers some really concrete ideas. One that I loved was the idea of mentorship programs.
Okay, tell me more.
So basically, connecting autistic individuals with professionals in their fields of interest.
So not just traditional job training.
No, it's about genuine connections and support. And the blog also talks about social inclusion.
Right. I remember they mentioned social skills groups specifically for autistic adults.
Yeah, creating spaces where they can connect with others who understand their experiences.
That makes so much sense, especially given how isolating it can be.
Totally. It's about building real friendships and combating that social isolation.
So all of this requires a big perspective shift, right?
Oh, for sure.
Not just from individuals, but institutions too.
The blog really pushes for greater awareness and acceptance of neurodiversity in all areas of life. Education, employment, healthcare, housing.
It's about recognizing that different doesn't mean less than. And building inclusive spaces actually benefits everyone.
Right. And the blog also highlights the needs of families and caregivers.
Oh, that's so important. It's not just the autistic individual who carries the weight of all this.
Absolutely. Caregiving can be so rewarding, but also incredibly demanding and isolating.
Yeah.
The blog talks about increasing access to respite care so caregivers can get a break. And then things like support groups and parent training programs.
Like recognizing that caregivers need care too, right?
Yeah, and giving them the tools and knowledge to support their loved ones effectively. One thing that really stuck with me was that idea of peer-to-peer support networks for families.
Oh, wow, that's powerful.
Right. Connecting with families who are going through similar things, who get it.
It's about building community, not just for autistic individuals, but for their families too.
Exactly. And all of this leads to this overarching theme, the power of advocacy.
Yeah.
It's not just about awareness, it's about action. Amplifying those voices of autistic people and their families and pushing for systemic change.
So contacting officials, supporting organizations, educating ourselves and others.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be these grand gestures. It can be small things.
Yeah.
Like challenging those stereotypes we hear, or just being more mindful of how our words and actions affect others.
Creating a ripple effect of understanding and compassion.
Exactly.
Welcome back. As we wrap up this deep dive into autism resources and that link between autism and poverty,
Yeah.
I'm really struck by how cheap ABA doesn't just present the problems, but actually gives us tools for change. It's like, okay, here's what we can do.
I know, right? It's empowering.
Totally.
And one of the solutions that really stuck with me was the need for more community integration.
Oh, tell me about that.
It's not enough to just like offer services, right?
Right.
We need to create communities where autistic people feel like they belong, where they're valued, welcomed, and empowered to actually participate.
So moving beyond just like tolerance
Yeah.
to genuine acceptance.
Exactly.
I'm thinking about those social skills groups we
Yeah,
talked about,
right.
but also like broader things, sensory-friendly events, inclusive programs, accessible spaces.
Yes. All fantastic examples. And the blog goes even further, talking about supported living options for autistic adults.
What do they suggest?
Well, they advocate for like co-housing communities specifically designed for neurodiversity,
Right.
or intentional neighborhoods where people are committed to inclusivity.
That's fascinating. So it's about creating environments where people can just be,
Exactly, without that pressure to conform to expectations that might not fit their neurology.
And support doesn't have to mean sacrificing independence either.
Right. They also talk about legal and financial support, which is so often overlooked.
Yeah, that makes sense.
For a lot of autistic individuals, navigating things like legal documents, finances, government benefits
Right.
can be really overwhelming.
It's like another layer of that autism tax.
Exactly. So they suggest things like training legal professionals to better understand their autistic clients
Oh, interesting.
and developing financial literacy programs specifically for people on the spectrum.
It sounds like these seemingly small steps could actually make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
And it all circles back to awareness, right? The more we understand about autism,
Yeah.
the better we can support it.
That's the key. The blog really pushes us to move past surface level awareness and get to a deeper understanding.
It's about listening to those stories, sharing those voices, and advocating for real change.
It's about realizing that neurodiversity isn't a problem to be solved. It's part of what makes us human.
And as we wrap up, I'm honestly feeling really hopeful. The challenges are tough,
Yeah,
but the possibilities, well, they're incredible.
I agree. We've seen that change possible when we combine knowledge and compassion.
It's about moving beyond awareness into action and working together to create a world where everyone can thrive. So, as we sign off today, I want to leave everyone with a question. What one small action will you take today to make a difference in the lives of autistic individuals and their families?
It could be anything, really.
Yeah, like educating yourself further, having a conversation, supporting an organization.
Right.
Every step, big or small, moves us closer to that vision.
Change starts with each of us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.